Before we get started, I want to encourage you to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so that you don't miss any of the content that is released by Go Collect. And if you're interested, head over to Regie Collects here on YouTube. It's Wednesday, and you know what that means. It's time for the Go Collect speculation video. Stay tuned. Regie here, your friendly neighborhood bodybuilder and comic book collector, and the host of the Go Collect speculation video. And I want to welcome you to another episode. In this episode, we are going to spend some time talking about 6 blog posts that have been sent in to Go Collect. And a couple of these blog posts actually have something in common, as you'll hear in just a few moments. The first blog post is actually a pretty interesting one because it builds upon something that is swirling around the comic book community right now, specifically the Snyder Cut. And you can hear people out there chanting, "Release the Snyder Cut." There is a lot of excitement and anticipation around this cut because a lot of folks were disappointed with the Justice League movie, and they feel that this darker, revised cut, the original cut, is going to actually make some magic happen, and folks are very excited about that. And the blogger in this blog post spends a little time making a compelling argument as to why DC and HBO may have decided to release the cut. And it's not just because fans were asking for it to be done. The blogger basically says there may be a little more to it, specifically because HBO needed to make some noise. They needed to build some excitement. They decided to go ahead and sign the deal with DC to allow this movie to be, or this cut, I should say, to be released exclusively on HBO Max, which built a lot of excitement around the streaming platform. And maybe there wasn't a whole lot of excitement before that, but certainly now folks are paying attention, and we won't get our first look at this movie until 2021. But again, there's a lot of excitement around it. The second point that the blogger makes in the blog post is that the Snyder Cut actually introduces Darkseid, and we've actually heard that Darkseid will be in this cut. The benefit of that is that it actually sets up the New Gods movie. And the New Gods movie, which comes from Jack King Kirby, is a movie that was announced on the other side after Marvel talked about the Eternals. DC started talking about the New Gods, and there wasn't a whole lot of excitement around New Gods, unlike the Eternals movie. But now that we know the Darkseid is going to be in the Snyder Cut, we know that Darkseid is probably going to appear in the New Gods movie as well, and I think folks are kind of excited about that. So again, the blogger makes a really interesting argument that I haven't heard anywhere else. I would definitely encourage you to check this one out. If you are a fan of the Snyder Cut, if you're a fan of Darkseid, if you just want to see and hear good things about DC's movies, check out this blog post. The link down in the description. This next blog post is honestly a fantastic blog post. I've read it twice, and I'm going to be honest with you, I'm going to read it again because it does a fantastic job of explaining the differences between two teams that I think a lot of people might confuse and or just have some confusion around. I am specifically talking about the Justice League of America and the Justice Society of America. Now, those two things may sound alike, but trust me when I tell you that they are not the same. And the blogger does a really good job of explaining the differences between these two teams, the similarities between them, the history between. It is a really well done blog post. If you are a fan of the Justice League or the Justice Society, fan of DC, fan of Green Lantern and the Flash and the original Flash, read this blog post. Read it. You will not be disappointed if you take the time to check it out. This next blog post is a pretty cool one, and it's cool for a couple of reasons. One, because it is written by a blogger that is a huge fan of variant comics, so I'm a fan of that. The other thing is that the blogger actually highlights several really cool books associated with some awesome characters. And I don't own a single book on this list, but I am a fan of the characters. The very first book that the blogger talks about is Spider-Man #1, specifically the Adi Gronoff hip-hop variant featuring Miles Morales. And Miles is super hot right now. I am a huge fan of this character. I don't own very many of his books, but I absolutely enjoy the character and I believe that he has some long-term potential. The blogger points out in this article that this particular book had a print run that was slightly less than 100,000 copies, and they are putting forth the notion that this particular book, the hip-hop Adi Gronoff, was about 10% or less of the overall total. And they point out here that there was a little bit of some controversies associated with how this particular book was being issued by Marvel, because it required retailers to satisfy a minimum order on the main cover before they could actually get the variants. And so that might be why there is such a relatively small number of this book out there. But if you can find one for a fair price, this might be a book that you want to take a look at. The next book on the list is the Sentry #1, specifically the 1 in 50 variant. I absolutely love the Sentry. I love everything about this character. I remember reading about this character back in the day in the mid-2000s, and I remember being so confused as to why I did not remember this character from when I read comics back in the 90s. And many of you are probably watching this laughing because you know that that's the way that the character was introduced. It was almost like he was an original character when he wasn't, but because of who he was erased from history and erased from time or forgotten and all that kind of stuff. Just a really fantastic character, a great origin story in my opinion, and a fantastic introduction. So if you are a fan of the Sentry, you might want to check this book out, because the blogger actually puts forth the notion that potentially the MCU might actually decide to do something with the Sentry. Do we know that that's going to happen? We absolutely don't, but the Sentry is a cool character. And so again, 6 total books are on this list. I definitely want to encourage you to check out this blog post, especially if you like variant comics. If you are a speculator or someone that sells comics, you will know the feeling that I'm about to talk about in just a second. That feeling when you had a book in your collection and the value of that book suddenly goes up and you realize that you sold that book, that you no longer have that book in your collection. That feeling that you get in the pit of your stomach is what I experienced when I was reading this blog post. Right up until I remembered that I actually still have a couple of copies in the collection. So then I felt a whole lot better, right? So it was just a little bit of a roller coaster that I went on. This blogger does a really good job in this blog post of talking about how the Black Panther self-titled series has actually started to pick up a little bit of steam. And the blogger does a really good job of highlighting 3 different CGC grades and looking at the positive trends associated with those books. I'm specifically talking about the 9.8, the 9.4, and the 9.2, all of Black Panther #1. The blogger points out here that a 9.8 last sold for $725. There are 229 on the CGC census, and that book has almost a 12% return associated with it. The 9.4 last sold for $154 with 670 copies on the CGC census, but that book also has a positive return of just over 29%. A 9.2 last sold for $100. 474 on the CGC census actually has about an 8% return. So what we're talking about here is a trend return range that is positive, roughly 7.8% all the way up to 29.4% over the last 4 months. That is a lot of really great movement for a book that traditionally doesn't do all that well. So if you have some interest in the Black Panther, if you believe that there is some potential here, especially with the Black Panther movie coming out at some point in the future, you might want to take a look at this book. This next blog post is a pretty interesting one because in it, the blogger takes some time to basically compare the returns associated with the first appearance of the Punisher to the second appearance of the Punisher. And I'm a huge fan of Amazing Spider-Man, and so the first and second appearance of the Punisher actually occurs in Amazing Spider-Man. So the blog posts capture my attention just from that. But I also really enjoy the Punisher as a character, specifically how he shows up in the Netflix series. Hands down, arguably one of the best series that Netflix actually put out. And there's a lot of speculation, a lot of rumor that the Punisher could be making a return at some point on a small screen or large screen down the line. And so this blog post is honestly well timed because this could be a fantastic time to actually pick up the first and or the second appearance. But the blogger does a really solid job of looking at the returns associated with the first appearance as well as the second appearance. And I'll tell you, the second appearance actually outperformed the first appearance. Now, there's some caveats there. Some caveats that I am not going to give you. I want to encourage you to read this blog post because it is really well done. And I do not think that you're going to be disappointed if you take the time to read it. And if you're a Spider-Man fan or a Punisher fan, you're going to read it anyway and you're going to enjoy it. It's in the description. Check it out. So we have been talking about Sony off and on for the last couple of weeks, and I think it's really cool. I'm going to be honest with you because I'm a Spider-Man fan. I think many of you know that. I am a fan of more and more movies coming out because I enjoy seeing these characters come to big screen and the small screen. And so there is a lot of rumor, as many of you know, about Madam Web actually getting her own spinoff as part of the Sony universe. And I'm pretty excited about this because there isn't a whole lot that is actually out there about Madam Web. And so Sony has an opportunity to really shape this character. There are some rumors out there that they are actually going to cast Madam Web as a younger actress versus how she might actually appear in the comics. And there is rumor as of these last few weeks that there are two actresses that are actually in the running for this role. We are specifically talking about American Hustle's Amy Adams. And we're also talking about CHARLIZE THERON. There's a lot of excitement about both of these characters these actresses, as I think both could do a fantastic job. As of late, there is also some news that a director has been selected, and we're talking about S.J. CLARKSON, who actually directed many episodes of Jessica Jones on Netflix as well as The Defenders. And I loved Jessica Jones. And so if this is the person that's going to direct the Madam Web movie, I am all for it. If you're interested in this character at all, I definitely want to encourage you to check out this blog post because they spend a little time talking about some of the nuances of what could happen as well as talking about the first appearance of Madam Web. With that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this video. I want to thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this content, and I definitely want to encourage you to tune in next week when we get to do this all over again.